Our second reading is Psalm 13. Let us listen together for God's word. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Quotable Woody Allen once said, "Most of the time I'm not having very much fun. The rest of the time I'm not having any fun at all." In our series this Lent on the Psalms, it seems that we've taken quite a dark tone. Last week we looked at psalms of confession, psalms that invite us to open up our darkness to God, our sin, our wrongdoing, our shortcoming. And this week, today, we reach the low point of prayer, which is the expression of anger. It is called in the form of a psalm a lament. Now, we have begun on the darker side, but we will climb our way back up to praise on Easter morning. But for now, we'll dwell in the darker side of the Psalms. Now, I think that there is a general awareness among most readers of Scripture that these psalms of lament, exist. We sort of know that they're in there, but there are so many psalms that these psalms of lament feel somewhat marginal or inconsequential when you factor them into the whole picture of the Psalms. The language of our worship, so much derived from the Psalms, is language of praise, language of thanksgiving. The language of lament in our worship is exceedingly rare, but this seems fitting, it seems proportional, it seems appropriate given this our sort of marginal sense of the presence of these psalms in the Psalter. But we couldn't be more wrong. If we took all 150 psalms and divided them up into categories or genres, we would find that the category with the most psalms is lament. There are more psalms of lament than psalms of thanksgiving, more psalms of lament than psalms of praise. And while we have favored the language of praise in our worship, we have neglected the language of suffering, a language that every human heart knows. But we've done this for obvious reasons. The Psalms of Lament, they often feel self-centered. It's all about me and my problems. And some of the language even feels a little bit blasphemous. Are we even allowed to talk to God in this way? Are we even allowed to use this language toward God in our worship? And if we feel this way, we're not alone. When we look at the contemporaries of ancient Israel, those religious traditions and peoples that existed around them, and what we know of those religious traditions, we see no parallel to lament. The other cultures around the people of Israel did not feel the freedom to approach God in the same way that Israel does. No cultures permitted themselves to complain to their gods or to question their deity's wisdom or love or goodness, much less to become angry and indignant toward their gods. Now, throughout the Psalms, lament takes a number of forms. It grows out of a variety of circumstances. Some of the Psalms of lament focus on enemies. My enemies surround me. My enemies overwhelm me. They overtake me. There are Psalms that focus on the misfortune that has befallen the psalmist. There are Psalms like our first one this morning, Psalm 137, that grow out of the experience of exile, of being away from one's homeland. There are Psalms that express fear, doubt, worry. There are Psalms that express grief, sadness, and loneliness. And when you take them all together, there are some very important common features that make up the Psalms of lament. And the first is that they are directly addressed to God. God is not spoken of in the third person as a distant reality. God is addressed directly and usually with a bit of a sharp edge. How long, O Lord, must I wait? My God, why have you forsaken me? A lament addresses God directly, and a lament is unrestrained self-expression. We spoke last week of confession as an act of honesty, complete and total honesty. Lament then takes that one step further. And it's not just about opening up who we are. It is about having no inhibitions in expressing our feelings. If we feel it, we say it. If we think it, we say it. Even if it's blasphemy. Lament is unrestrained self-expression. And finally, a lament ends with the expectation of deliverance. Now, sometimes this is in fits and starts. It's not always wholehearted. It's not always a full-throated affirmation that God will deliver me from my situation. But the Psalms of lament, with one or two notable exceptions, they lean into God's deliverance. They move in that direction. And so the basic premise of a lament is that God cares that I am in pain. And God can be expected to do something about it. God cares that I am in pain. And God can be expected to do something about it. I've spent some time over the years reading authors who are generally referred to as the new atheists. These are mostly professors, journalists who have risen to prominence by writing books against religion in general, sometimes against Christianity specifically, but usually just against religion. And one of the accusations that they level against religious people is that they are self-centered. They are self-centered on a cosmic level, to think that the God of the universe, not just the God of this world, the God of the universe cares about me and my problems. They accuse believers of thinking that God should believe, that God should care what's wrong with me, that God should care what my problem is. And for these new atheists, that is self-centeredness of cosmic proportions. But they couldn't be further from the truth. God shouldn't care. And we don't think God should care. But God does. God does care. The psalmist says it best in Psalm 8, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals, that you care for them." The premise of a lament is that God cares that I am in pain, and God can be expected to do something about it. But the posture of a lament is not the expectation that God should care about my problems and that God should fix it because I deserve it. the posture of a lament is a boldness that is born of humility. It begins with humility. As we are humbled by the vastness of the universe, our minuscule place in that universe, humbled, as the psalmist says, that God should be mindful of us in the first place, humbled by the covenant that God has established, by the relationship into which God has entered with us, that God has embraced us in this family, the covenant. And we are emboldened by that covenant, emboldened by that relationship, not because we deserve something, not because God owes us something. We dare to be bold because God has invited us into that sort of relationship. And in case we have doubts, we dare to be bold because the psalmist sets the pattern, sets the example, opens the way, gives us the language for that boldness that is born of humility, to lament to God. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And then this question, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? I love this question. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How can we experience joy when there is such sorrow? How can we find happiness, contentment, satisfaction, or peace when our lives and this world are so broken? How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? This one question contains the full extent of human suffering. A whole lament packed into a single question. Though I will add that Psalm 137 has one additional verse that we didn't read, and it is this: happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rocks. That's how the psalm ends. Which brings us to the purpose of lament. What's it for? Why pray this sort of prayer? Why open our ugliest selves, our darkest, innermost thoughts to God? What is the purpose? Why bring to God our complaints and our frustration and our anger? Why share our desire to see harm come to those that we despise? Why offer our ugly thoughts and feelings to God? The point is not to sanctify these feelings. It is not as if in offering these things up to God we somehow make them okay or acceptable, as if God blesses them because we have offered them up to God. It is not to make us feel okay that we want to dash the children of Babylon against the rocks. What the Psalms of Lament teach us is that the healing we desire, the healing and the wholeness that we need, always takes place in the presence of God. The healing that we need always takes place in the presence of God. And unless we bring these things into God's presence, they cannot be healed. Unless we open ourselves up completely to God, we cannot find wholeness. The act of lament, the act of sharing our dark and ugly side in prayer. I like to think of lament as the tilling of a garden. Its time for growth has passed. It's barren. And so you tear up that hardened soil, which has no life in it. You turn it over and you take that waste and the detritus of last year's growth and you turn it upside down and you feed it to the worms of the dirt. You turn it inside out. You turn it upside down, and from the compost of our anger, our bitterness, and even our hatred, new growth emerges. God is able to take us, the barrenness of our hearts, and turn it upside down and to bring new life. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Amen.